since it was introduced, GAC, or Grand Arena Championships, or Grand Arena for the dinosaurs among us, has managed to actually remain pretty interesting and relevant at a time when the main experience of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes is kind of about hoarding gear and mats for rather questionable jail requirements, hacking your way around all these weird feats and challenges and conquest, and waiting for the next game update introducing the new exciting nerfs and the ways that CG is going to screw you over yet again. GAC is legitimately fun, especially if you put effort and time into it. And while we know the hardcore players definitely have the effort part, not everybody has the time part, especially those lucky bastards who have a life. Or no life at all because we are stuck at work using lunch breaks to record videos about obscure mobile games. So how do you maximize your effectiveness in GAC with the minimum amount of time? Well, as someone who really enjoys GAC and has very little time, let me share with you what I do. So from my observation, the method that I use involves an initial time investment, somewhere around 30 minutes before the start of each GAC season, about 10 to 20 minutes for every defense phase, and about 30 to 50 minutes for attack phase, depending on how you want to go about it. Some people like to go fast, some people like to go slow. That's what she said. Alright, so probably the most important part of this method happens before you even get matched to anybody. It basically involves you reviewing your roster and assigning teams. And for that, I like to use Excel. Oh no, math, I failed that in high school. No worries, no math here. Excel just makes it easier to move stuff around, and that's why I like it. So basically the first thing I do is input all the characters I plan to use. This is the more time-consuming but brainless part of the process. So go ahead and have Arnold raging about nerfs playing in the background. Now, when you're done, surprise, start making squads. This is the trickier part since there are a bajillion ways to do this, but for the sake of time and simplicity, just do the best you can. In general, for squads you think you'll use an offense, just try to make something that's flexible enough to take down a variety of teams. And for squads you're likely to use on defense, go for something that strips down banners. So teams with AoEs, pre-taunting tanks, things like that. Something basically that will not necessarily stop your opponent in their tracks, but it'll survive long enough to, reduce their banners and just reduce their overall performance. And then something else I like to do here is to sort of rate my squads in terms of strength. So here you see my GL teams in purple, my top teams in orange, my secondary teams in green, and my lowest tier teams in yellow. And well, there's the leftovers right there in gray. And I'll show you why this is helpful in a moment. Alright, that's done. You're matched to an opponent. The first thing you need to do is to assess your opponent. So get a quick look at their roster. So what advantages do they have over you? Are there any disadvantages? I often come across people with more GLs than what I have, but they tended to lack somewhere else, either in diversity of roster or just missing some key legendary tunes, things like that. So keep that in mind when you decide if you want to go heavy offense or defense or a combination of the two, however you roll. Now, for the most important part of this whole ordeal, go to SWGOH.GG. Yeah, I'm pretty sure most of you people know where that's at. If not, I'm not entirely sure how I even found this video, but anyway. Look up your opponent's GAC history. So this is important. You really gotta look it up. And take a look at what they're taking on offense. Do they undersize a lot? Do they overkill a lot? Do they make the most of their offensive roster? Do they sometimes forget to attack at all? Because, that sometimes happens and it can leave you in a weird situation. And then, of course, take a look at their defense. Do they put down tricky teams that catch people off guard? Or just really tough teams that tend to block their opponent altogether? Most importantly, is their defense relatively unchanged from round to round? Or do they adjust their defense according to who they're facing? All of this information kind of tells you what sort of opponent you're facing. I've personally found that people who undersize, put down tricky teams, and change their defense strategies often are the toughest opponents I've ever had. So you should definitely not underestimate those people when you see them. So yeah, these are just the things to keep in mind as you think about your strategy. I'm not going to get too into it because it's a much bigger topic. And there are people who are far more competent than I am who've made extensive guides on GAC strategy. So Yeah. Alright, now let's finally make all this Excel work that we did earlier finally do some work for us. Assuming your opponent's defense remains relatively consistent, that's the majority of your opponents most likely, well, depending on the division where you are. But for me at least, that's the case. So now that you have a relative idea of what you might face, go ahead and put down their defense teams in the sheet. Now make a copy of your teams and paste it next to those. Now cut and paste the teams you'd plan to use next to the opponent teams. Depending on how risky these would be, you may want to allocate an extra team or two in case something goes wrong. Here I'm showing a 3v3 style championship. It's probably my least favorite one because it means you have to account for way more teams and just have to do a lot more work, but this is where I found this whole method with assigning teams in Excel to be really, really helpful. The reason I like cutting and pasting is I can see right away what I have left for defense, and that allows me to adjust in case my defense is too light or too heavy. You'll notice I'm pretty much omitting ships here. I'm finding that the ships are much easier to plan for. You tend to make a decision right off the bat on what you're going to do with them depending on the opponent's roster. It's not to say that it's easy, but it's just easier than the multitude of teams you have to worry about for toon squads. But of course, you can do whatever the heck you want. So I found that this method really saves me a lot of time and headache on really busy days, while still making sure I can make Kyber every time, with fairly minimal effort, I would say. So I hope this helps somebody.